What do you recommend regarding supplementation, dietary supplements?
This will be interesting. So I wrote a book about 15 years ago called Supplements Exposed, and about 90% of the supplements on the market are mostly chemicals, and they are formulated under the word natural, and back in the 1930s, there was global attempts by the pharmaceutical industry, who still produces about 80% of the raw material for all supplements, to say that all we need to do is put 10% natural into it. Now, when I speak to my very conservative medical colleagues, they tell me, well, if you're saying take whole food supplements, and that's what we suggest, food or food extracts that haven't been heated above 110, 112 degrees, they're saying, how come the formula is the same? And I say, well, sadly, we didn't have the consciousness to understand that what you get in a food has a lot of nuance and subcultures that we've yet to discover. Remember, the science of nutrition is only it started in 1928 at Cornell University. It's a very young science. We're all learning. Every day of my life, I'm learning more and more and more. But what I do know is that we're not arrogant enough or smart enough to know everything that's in food. So I'd rather have a food extract or food itself ground up without it being heated and cooked and processed. So the medicinal part is gone, and that's what the supplement should be. So algae and pollens and whole food supplementation. And the other ones we've been looking at very, very seriously for decades. Literally, the immune system attacks them. So a lot of the vitamin C that's being injected, ascorbic acid, as my good colleague and friend said, when you write the book, don't make this abstract, an abstract book. What you do is tell what ascorbic acid is. It's only 1/8 of true vitamin C. You're missing 7/8. And the body's immunity identifies that.
I did do that.
I think that the way to approach supplements is that, with some exceptions, B12 would be one if you're eating a pretty strict vegan diet, that they should be looked at as medicines for the most part. And they can have some usefulness when used judiciously in a practice. My feeling about how the we have a reverence for protein. Dr. Davis wrote a great book about that. We have a reverence for isolated nutrients. And my personal belief about that is because we discovered individual nutrients that were capable of resolving health issues like scurvy and beriberi. We didn't really know there were going to be 100,000 more nutrients discovered in food. We didn't understand the complexity of all of it. And so the mythology of the magical properties of the individual nutrient that solves problems carried over. And so when people talk about everybody needs to take lots of vitamins and multivitamins and all this, I've asked people at conferences, I don't know where you practice, but when is the last time somebody came in your office with scurvy or beriberi? Seriously, people are suffering from whole food deficiencies. They're not suffering from particular vitamin deficiencies. And what concerns me a lot about people eating some version of the standard diet is that and I talked about this in my lecture on Thursday when we were looking at Alzheimer's patients, for example, risk factors for Alzheimer's, which include higher intake of metals. Where is it all coming from? Well, they're eating it in the animal food, then they're eating it in the fortified foods, then they're eating it in a multivitamin, and people don't keep track of all those different sources of all those, and so they end up over-consuming nutrients that in tiny amounts are actually essential and good for us, but in higher amounts, not so much. So I think some of this comes not only from the historical perspective of the nutrients having magical qualities, but also the idea in our culture that if a little bit of something's a good idea, 250 times as much must be fabulous, and that's actually not always the case.
I don't know how to follow that. Brilliant, absolutely agree. I have such a hard time with supplements because we need B12. If you're on a vegan diet, you absolutely need B12. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. There's a big global prevalence of vitamin D deficiency, so I recommend people don't just blindly supplement, but they go and get tested to see what their serum D levels are and then make a decision on it. But I also am on the other side where I don't trust it. Have you seen any of those blind studies where they'll go out and they'll take a supplement and get it actually analyzed, and it's almost never what it says on the label, so you don't know what additives you're getting or fillers you're getting and what the dosing you're getting. So to me, it feels really kind of like a shot in the dark. But on the other side, we do need B12, and so it's a good question. I'm very open-minded to this because I think it's an evolving science. But I think that the idea of taking a multivitamin on top of a standard American diet and thinking you're going to be okay it's not a magic bullet, and that's one of the most important parts, in my opinion.
Yeah, the health professions study from Harvard looked at physicians over years, and they did find a benefit to people on a longevity scale that were taking vitamins, but the people that were taking vitamins tended to be healthier in general. It tended to be a selection of people that, they were taking vitamins because they had tried to do things that were healthy. Most of the vitamin studies have shown no benefit, and there's been a lot of stuff lately saying not to do. I was fascinated by a New England Journal of Medicine article or was it Lancet? I can't remember, where they were following a group of people that had lung cancer. And they had found that in places where they had a lot of vitamin A intake, there was no lung cancer, and that it would improve it, so they thought they would give these people vitamin A. And guess what happened? Their lung cancer got worse. They had to stop the study because they got more mets and worsening with the vitamin A. So a lot of these things that we think are benign, we think it may be good for us, it may do nothing, I'm going to take the chance, may actually be detrimental to us. So I get a little bit nervous with some of these things. I heard actually in Hippocrates, you guys give blue-green algae? Do you worry? Okay, as a medical doctor, the one disease that scares the living day out, I always think I'm getting it too, because I'm so scared of this disease, is ALS. Like my finger will twitch. I'll be like, oh my God, I'm dying of ALS. And it's a terrible way to die. And they've been looking a lot at what causes ALS, and BMAA, which is a serine analog, has been found to be associated with it, and they find that in blue-green algae. So now I fear blue-green algae and spirulina because of but I don't know, I just don't know. I mean, doesn't that make you worried?
There's, the original life form on the planet was blue-green algae, so there's wide varieties of them.
Right.
And so that's the concern, and I'm sure in some you'd find that. Two things, back in '68, Pauling said it well. There's no disease that doesn't have a nutritional deficiency component. So it was 1905 when William Fletcher in England wiped out beriberi with his own little fingers, taking the nutritious part off brown rice, putting it in a pill, and he created B vitamins. The very first nutrient we ever discovered was 1905. And from that point, 1912, a Polish-born guy that worked at the Lister Institute, and Lister was the smartest pastor, never got the credit, literally said, let's call this vitamin. And the word vitamin is really a hip name. Vita from Greek meaning life, and amine from nitrogen, growth. So the word vitamin means life growth. And from 1905 to 1955, 85% of the nutrients that we are using today were discovered. Can you imagine how many more there are? We really didn't know what a phytochemical was until the 90s. We discovered it not we, but somebody discovered it in 1948. 92, they did the work at Johns Hopkins and said this stuff, basically kills cancer. And now they say right across the board, I write books on this, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, mental illness, neurological problems. But ALS in early stage, you can put a brake on that one. Late stage, usually hyperbaric chambers, glutathione IVs, radical shifts, and now we're vaporizing the glutathione too, which is phenomenal.
Glutathione is very powerful antioxidant.
One thing I wanted to add with reference to vitamin D, which is sort of the craze, there's always a shiny new thing in healthcare, and everybody wants to trot on after it. While I think that vitamin D can be beneficial for very small populations of people, the problem with population screening for vitamin D is that we have now close to 1,000 studies showing that vitamin D levels are often depressed because of disease, not the cause of disease. There's a big difference between those two things. One of the best ones, the easiest to explain, it was done in Georgia at an emergency room where hyperglycemic patients who were so hyperglycemic they had to be taken to the emergency room. When they got there, blood tests, very low vitamin D levels, 12.3 average. As soon as blood sugar was stabilized, jumped up to 27 point something. Okay, so you can see how the ridiculousness of giving these people vitamin D supplements, hoping you're going to change their condition. Their condition changing is going to change the vitamin D levels. The other thing is that we had set, it was an estimate, safe vitamin D levels about 12.5 until the disease mongering started. And now it just depends on what lab you send the specimen to, the blood test to, what you're going to get back in terms of a reference range. And some of them are 75 to 100, which means everybody qualifies for supplementation. And the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force issued a report, it was either last year or the year before, saying we have to stop this nonsense. The Institute of Medicine issued a report, we have to stop this nonsense. We have no idea if higher vitamin D levels are better. We have no idea what the consequences are of supplementation. One study showed that 3,000 international units a day increased fat stores of vitamin D by 337% in 90 days. And the researchers concluded, we don't know what this means, but we think until we figure it out, we ought to put the brakes on this. So I think if you're in kidney failure, you're a good candidate for vitamin D. I think if you're in a nursing home and you haven't been outside since 1982, you probably ought to take some vitamin D. There would be some special cases, but we've tried. I said this in a couple of my talks. The money in medicine, whatever the branch, is in taking something that helps a small group of people and translating it into a population program. Because if everybody's doing it, you got $1 billion or $1 trillion market. If you reserve these things for the populations that benefit, you just can't make as much money.
You know, it's funny, like in bariatric surgery, they tell us to supplement everybody with these huge regimens of vitamins, and then the vitamin companies come and pay you to do it, so there's a big financial incentive for me to sell vitamins. But I can't do it with good conscience. And so what I do is, I'll check their vitamin D level, but that's not all. I'm checking their parathyroid hormone, which controls calcium. And if their parathyroid hormone's sky high, that means they're not getting enough calcium. Then I know that the low vitamin D is significant. But if their parathyroid hormone's normal, then I don't care what their vitamin D level is. But no one's doing that. They're just saying buy vitamin D. So I don't know. Buyer beware.
Before we leave this subject, two people mentioned that vegans have to watch B12. Well, about more than 20 years ago, the Framingham group out of Boston, Harvard offshoot, put a study out and showed that the B12 studies on most medical blood tests, and they haven't changed, are wrong. They may say you have it and you don't have it, or you don't have it and you have it. And we were stunned because we were the place that, every once in a while some legitimate organization would come and say, hey, people on your diet must have B12 deficiencies, and we'd say, oh, look at the blood tests. They really don't after they've been on this a while. That blew us out of the water because the blood test was wrong. So we started to do SpectraCell test back then, and here's what I've discovered. I've looked at 11,222 people as of 3 days ago with these more sophisticated tests. Meat eaters, fish eaters, dairy eaters, chicken eaters have an 8% higher incidence of B12 deficiency than vegans, because B12 is not a B vitamin. It's a soil-based microorganism, and vegans have a deficiency too. Why? Because that blew my mind. It took me 3 years. I went to every medical library I could. Our intestinal tract is radically de-evolved. It's radically different than it was hundreds of years ago, not thousands, hundreds of years ago. And we don't have the little pocket where the food, which was all organic, by the way, until the Second World War, we used to sit and culture the bacteria, the soil-based bacteria B12. And so Dr. Fontana from Washington University of Bologna did a study on raw food vegans and showed we have less, but we still have B12 deficiencies because it's an anatomical problem. So everyone needs a B12 supplement, and you better get a bacterial form. Most on the market are not. You also have to look at your genetics. There's a small group, now we do genetic testing, a small group of people that need, unfortunately, a methyl, but we try to get a food-based methyl form, and it's a small group, probably less than 5–10%, but the truth of the matter is there's a lot of considerations now we didn't know 5 years ago.
I thought to myself that, because I've seen some people that are vegan that don't have B12 Now, I measure B12, but once again, I measure MMA to see the actual pathway, so is there an actual real deficiency? But I had one girl who came in and she had a normal B12, normal MMA. She never takes any supplements, doesn't believe in them. And I asked her why, and she said because she has organic soil that she doesn't till, that she takes the carrot out of the soil and eats it without washing it. And then I started trying to do that, so I got this organic local farm, and they would send me food, but like I would take this thing out and there would be worms crawling on it and stuff.
His wife questioned him around that
Yeah,
time.
and so I just couldn't do it for long enough to test myself. But do you think that if we were eating like that, we would need a B12? Because I'll tell you that everyone's argument is veganism's wrong because you need a B12 supplement,
Yeah,
which is
well,
ridiculous.
Meat eaters need it too, so.
But everybody, and I check more meat eaters B12s than probably anybody, because I do a lot of lab testing, and I see lots of B12 deficiency meat eaters.
I think the
lots.
answer is, in the long run, yes, but probably it may take a generation or more to get
To
back
change
to
the
that.
soil and get the.